everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Mask. I'm one of your co-hosts, EJ, and joining me today is Lori.
Hello.
And T.
Hey, everyone.
This is episode 23, which we're calling Transitional Masks of Mind and Body. Just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or a replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. And I think when we talk about the transitional mass of mind, body, we're talking about age, we're talking about health, your cognitive changes, how your brain changes as you age, your emotional, traumas that cause some of that to happen, physical changes as, you grow from, a kid to an adult, we always joke about in hit your 30s and you start having those extra aches and pains that you don't used to not have. Or you do something on a Saturday and then Sunday, it's like, I found a muscle that I didn't know I had because you're, in pain. So, and I think a lot of people I think Tina will share a little bit today about, she's turning 50. Lori just turned 50 a couple years ago. So that was a big milestone for her. And, I'll be 40 in a year and a half and change. So that's a big milestone for me coming up. And, there's also, with your mind too, it's like job changes, your age, like as you change from a teenager having just maybe a bagging groceries job to growing in your education, in your age, as in, you get a different job or you get a new job, or for me, I had a job for 8 years that I really liked as as a deli worker, but there was no, promotion in that. It was just going to be that. So I had to transition out of that. And then I was unemployed for some time and I transitioned into taking care of my parents. And then, I was blessed with an actual job doing the caregiving. And now I'm transitioning into a new job, which I will talk about a little later. So I think, so I guess, Tina, let's talk a little bit about the cognitive, because I think that's going to be where it is. Cognitive, we're talking as you get older, your brain changes. Sometimes you have ADD, ADHD, some of those mental things where you can't function or you can't focus for long periods of time. You can't, sit still. Because I know sometimes I joke that I am, but I don't think I am. I just think it's a anxious habit of mine. But then there's also, as you age, there's Alzheimer's and dementia that can set in, that can also be in the family, that all of a sudden you hit 50 or 60 and you start not remembering where certain things are, or you start thinking you're 20 years in the past, and how that can impact people.
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing that comes to mind is just talking about developmental stages of the brain and how it works. And, when you're a kid, your brain is, I think if I remember correctly, it's 95% fully formed by the age of 5. So as far as structures, all the structures are available. However, they're not being used. Those come online as a child learns things. And so they build neural pathways. And what I find really interesting about early developmental stages of the brain is that it is not fully functional. People do not use the full capacity of their brain until they're in their mid-20s to late 20s. And so I often joke with my adolescent clients that the comparison of their brain to my brain, the structure is there, it's just not they're just not using it. And the part that's not fully developed until your mid-20s is the part that helps you plan, helps you think things through, understand there's consequences to your actions, being able to regulate your behaviors and your emotions. And so that's what makes being a teenager so difficult, is there's these expectations of them being little adults, because they can think in ways like they can add and subtract, and they can form sentences, and they're starting to understand that the world is a social structure around them, and starting to see patterns, but they don't understand them yet. And so we put a lot of pressure on them to be able to manage themselves as adults. And ironically, most of the adults that are expecting this of them barely have it themselves, if at all, to be able to manage their emotions and behaviors. And um, so that's just an area that I find very interesting, and feel like, we can do some things around that. And then the next part of the developmental stage, so we peak about mid-20s to mid-30s, where our brains are like sponges. And I mean, well, even as a child, our brain is sponges, but there's something that happens in that 10-15 year span where we are operating at our best, and we're just quick, we can do all these things. So those are great times to learn and start a new career. However, about mid to late 30s, something happens in our brain. So one of the things in a neuro pathway, those neurotransmitters there's this little leg, if you were to visually look at it, and it's got this wrapping around it called a myelin sheath. And that's a fatty tissue. That's what helps information go from one neurotransmitter to the next quickly and efficiently. But at about 35, we see that sheath starts to shrink, which means we can't, information does not move through our brain as quickly. And that continues to deteriorate over time. And there is some truth to use it or lose it at that point, for folks. So it's really important to keep people over 35 to keep their brains active and to stay on top of it. Mm-hmm. And I know that I was in my mid 30s when I started my, mid to late 30s when I started my master's degree. And I really noticed that learning and using the information efficiently was not as easy as it was.
Right. And that's why it's encouraged for kids to go to college when they're 19 to 25, because your brain can suck up more than it can until
right
later.
But we're still expecting those young 18 to 24-year-olds to be able to plan, which that's right. Not a part of their brain that's at its peak yet. They're learning to.
And I was thinking that the other key piece, because, I went to school older, just like you, and it is that you don't have any life experience to go along with that.
That's why that's not formed completely yet. That's how it gets formed, is to get life experience.
Right. And so I'm sure you found, probably similar to me, the life experiences that I had already lived through, in my mind, definitely compensated for the fact that I had to work a little harder to do some of the core things, of education.
Absolutely.
And where I definitely shined as a student, as an older student, was the applicability and the complete full understanding of what was being presented to me. So I was actually grateful I went to school later. I'd only done a little bit of college in my younger years, just back in the day when the dinosaurs roamed, we didn't have to have degrees to have a good job. And
not only that, I know I did a little bit of college when I was younger too, but I didn't have the attention for it. I was too distracted by the world and figuring that out.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. I really enjoyed going to school later, and actually found that I learned so much more when I went later,
Well, and I think I did do college early. I was, okay. So when I graduated high school, I couldn't wait to get out of there. And I wanted to take a year off and just have a job and just see if I even wanted to go to college. And I got you're going to college direction from my parents. And I signed up and I went to a local community college. I just took 1 or 2 classes a quarter. It took me 5 years to get a 2-year degree. I was miserable. I think I walked out of there with a 3.8 GPA, because the classes were super easy, because it was stuff I already had known. But it was just you're forced to take these classes that you already know everything about, because you have to have it on your record before you can graduate. And it's yes, I could have taken the classes, or I could have challenged the classes and tested out, but they're always taking that chance that if you test and you fail that test, then you're stuck taking it anyways. So I didn't bother doing that. And I think now, like, I have a friend, or Lori and I have a friend who literally, she had done some school, then she went and just had a career for a while, and decided about 4 years ago that she was going to go back to school and finish her bachelor's. And then she finished her bachelor's last year, and then she did a 1 year accelerated class program to get her master's degree from a different university. And she's 49. So she's, and now she's got her career. So it's like, it's a milestone, a major milestone for her, because now before she's 50, I personally, like, I don't know if I could do it, but I'm like super proud of her for doing it.
So a little bit to what you're speaking to there, excuse me, is that's the piece of that. What 18-year-old knows what they want to do in 5 years.
Right.
We're expecting them to invest into an education, and they can't, planning 5 minutes down the road is a challenge, let alone 5 years down the road.
Yes.
And that's complex thinking. It really is. And it requires so much, and it requires experience to draw from.
Right.
So now, granted, when I was 18, I could have told you that being a therapist was on my list of things I would like to do, but so was a bunch of other crackpot ideas. I didn't even graduate high school. I got a GED, and it took me a couple of years to get to that, because I was like, what's the point? I didn't understand. I couldn't until I did.
Yeah.
And then that's I got my GED, pretty my early 20s. And then I thought, I'll go to college, but I got a certificate in a clerical and word processing certificate. Now, here's where that was dumb. I had social anxiety. I couldn't go get the job as a secretary because I was too scared, but it seemed like a good idea. So I did it. Now, thankfully, I was able to use those credits in the future, but I didn't know that I could transfer those credits. So I had a lot of life lessons to learn and whatnot. So I think that, like I said, and kids start applying for colleges, when they're 16?
Yeah.
They're taking their SATs and they're doing all this stuff and then applying for colleges, and they don't know how to have a bank account half the time.
Right.
So,
yeah. So then we're talking school age, we're talking like, mid to late 30s now, and then kind of hit your 40s, your body starts changing more, your brain.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking too, so as we grow older, we're getting up the age range here. Probably due to socioeconomic reasons, we are retiring much later than we used to retire. What was national retirement age, like 55?
Yeah.
And isn't 55, you're considered a senior, right? You get your senior discount.
Some places you can still get your discount.
Yeah. You get your AARP gold member card.
Right.
I don't even know if they have one of those, but anyway. But I find it interesting because there's still a couple of commercials out there that kind of lean towards that. But I've noticed that there's more and more that are leaning, really until you're more 60s, almost early 70s now is much more likely to be a time that you would retire.
Right. Well, my retirement wouldn't be official as far as my benefits until I'm 65, at least.
Right.
They actually encourage you to wait 2 more years, I think it is.
Yeah.
So 67.
67, yeah. And that's
so anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because we're going farther in the age and our society.
Yeah.
And I wanted to also touch back on I find it really interesting. And I'd love to, at maybe a future date or whatever, dive into this concept of what we expect of teenagers. And then, because like I was watching a legal show last night, and they were debating whether to try this 17-year-old as an adult or as a child. What were the motivations? What was the intent? How much does he understand, or not understand? And,
Can he be rehabilitated?
Right. Can he be rehabilitated? It's just so interesting because, and I ran into this with, my own oldest son who joined the Marine Corps. He could sign on the dotted line and sign it, basically to say, I give my life for my country. But then in this country, he couldn't rent a car.
Right.
Because he wasn't considered old enough. You had to be 25. And I thought, wait a minute, you can hold a gun and die for your country, but you can't rent a car. We can drink, we can gamble, we can, and all the ages at which we do these things. I feel that in many ways, society missed the boat there. Like, why do we consider a 17-year-old an adult man or woman?
Right.
Well, I don't understand that. Yet they're not, as we joke about, they're not finished cooking upstairs. They're not even done yet.
I do think that's another episode, because I think that's one of those things that it's like there's also the level of crime, the level of damage done with the crime. And is this person likely to do it again when they're 18, 19, 20, 21? I mean, is this going to continue for them if there's not something done about it now?
And that would make sense. So yeah.
But it is a very serious question and a valid discussion.
Yeah. So let's definitely table that for now. But I think we should go back to that, because it's just such a huge psychological, mental, emotional piece with the foundations of our very lives. And then what we do from there. Yeah.
And that, I think there's a lot of factors, and, we'll definitely come back to it because I have a lot to say on that. You mentioned your son having been in the Marine Corps, and I was thinking, like, you're right. Like, he joined pretty much like high school graduation, and you join, and a lot of guys do that. And a lot of guys become lifers, and that's 20 years, like, to them, like, they can retire from the military in like 20 years. So by the time they're 40, they could actually retire from the military. And then it's like, now what? Yeah. And so a lot of guys will do that. They'll take the GI Bill, which is an opportunity for, if you're listening and you live out of the country, GI Bill is, an opportunity for the military service people to get another education afterwards if what they were doing in the military cannot translate into civilian life. And
which it rarely does.
Yes. Right. It's very rare. But I mean, there's computer system programming and stuff like that like they can translate into like civilian life, or work for subcontractor for the military. So there's different opportunities, but I just feel like we're talking about that now. You're like your late 40s, and like you're retiring from service. You're literally retired, and it's crazy to think that. And then you get this next career, and then you're sometimes in it, sometimes you struggle. How many veterans are out there that don't have jobs or are struggling for work because of X, Y, and Z situation? Or, maybe they were a certain, I don't know, not a high rank in the military, and they were just a soldier, and, gun toting soldier. And then they get out, and it's like, now what we have no like direction. And then it's hard to think about a direction. And even me at my mid 30s, like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing 10 years from now. Like, I don't know, like, I'm 38 and a half. What am I going to be doing when I'm 48 and a half? I don't know. I have hope.
I'm hoping it's in a new direction you're going. So
I'm confident it's gonna be, but and that's we'll talk about it a little bit later too, as we talk about like emotional and physical stuff too. But isn't, as we go, like, around late 30s, early 40s, around when some of our more severe medical diagnoses start to happen.
Sure, because the cells in our body have a shelf life, I guess is my theory. So things peak and then they come down the other side. And so things change in our body, including our immune systems and the wear and tear that our bodies go through, just through basic use, let alone those who've been hard on their bodies or through, hard work, etc. So yeah, we're going to see an increase, a sharp increase in certain medical diagnoses. And unfortunately, that is a thing. And then if people don't have good access to medical care throughout their lifespan, that can also impact how they're going to age, because they wouldn't have had, knowledge or anybody tracking their system, basically.
Right.
It's interesting too, I would say, just you talked about that, your physical. So one of my favorite surfers, everyone assumed he'd be retired by now. Just won a huge event, and he's what?
Kelly Slater.
Kelly Slater is who I'm talking about. But he's still winning these events next to teenagers.
Right.
In a very difficult sport, not one that anybody can walk on and do, right? And not that actually most sports, if you're really good at it, nobody can just walk on and do it. But what I've noticed is, and again, I know it's really easy to kind of rabbit hole here, but with the technology of today, with the science that we've learned, our bodies we're able to keep them at a different level longer. There's Tom Brady, think of all these athletes that are doing their sports careers much longer than we ever did before. Typically, but if you were more than 30 years old and you were in a professional sport, you were a senior citizen.
Yeah.
Whereas now we're seeing 40s, 50s. I was watching a motivational video about this 80-year-old lady who's doing bodybuilding stuff, and she's got this really amazing body, and I'm like, how old are you? I can't do it. I couldn't.
Right.
But I just think technologically we've advanced to where our bodies, that shelf life, we've learned how to extend the shelf life of those cells.
Yeah. Well, and even for example, I'm, like we said at the beginning, I'm getting ready to turn 50. There was a time that was considered senior, like we talked about earlier. I was heading into senior years, and certainly the generations before me, that's what it was. And so my mentality this year, as I started approaching 50, I was like, when did that happen? How did that happen? What does that mean?
Right.
What does it even mean to be 50? It used to be such a big deal. It was such a huge number as far as meaning and whatnot. So I decided to combat that. I normally don't celebrate my birthday. I don't make a big deal out of it. Just, I don't know, just never have. And I was like, maybe this year it would be fun because, man, everybody could have fun with that. I've got a sense of humor. So I passed it on to my kids, and they're planning my 50th birthday party later this year. And they are having so much fun with it. And so it's really exciting to watch them do that. And I figured it's kind of some of my age is how I think about it. So, and now, like you're saying, Lori, right now at this point, actually 50 is considered middle-aged.
Yeah.
And it's not senior.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I'm good with that. But it has been interesting to watch the observable physical changes that I'm going through.
Yes.
And at first it was a little bit disturbing. And then I was like, no, I kind of like it.
Yeah.
Like, I see changes happening in my face. Um, and one of the times I thought, oh, I'm starting to look my age. And I'm like, but that's not bad. It's not a
Right.
bad thing. You know, I kind of
Kids
like
in
it.
our
I'm comfortable with
society
who I
are
am.
perfectly polished, and yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and and I think there's a lot of that too. Like I was thinking back, my parents had this grand dream after I graduated high school of their retirement years. Um, it was planned that, my dad would retire, my mom would retire, and while I was home with the pets, taking care of them and working a regular job, that and taking care of the house, they'd travel. And 2 years after I graduated from high school, my dad's health took a serious turn for the worse. He was forced to retire a year early, or a few months early. And so he got his 30 years, but it was just like on the borderline. Like it was super, like he had 25 years, no, 24 years civil service for the military, and then he had 6 years active duty. So he got a 30-year of that service. But he was forced to retire, and that was not what he planned on doing. And, and then 5 years later or so, he's losing a leg, and then he's losing another leg, and my mom's struggling with her health. And so I feel bad, because even, technology can be great. Like you're talking all these sports people that are, but like you said, it's like having the access to the healthcare. Like these pro sports players have access to like everybody, but just your general, middle class family doesn't necessarily have that access. And I think that factors in a lot with your physical, your mental, your emotional, and spiritual kind of health when it comes to all this. Because had my parents had the financial means and the ability to have better medical and better access to it, like we were living in an area where there wasn't a lot of medical, and all the specialists were an hour ferry ride away to Seattle. And, when you have a mom who's, wasn't a fan of, traveling that far for medical and stuff, and just going to Tacoma was a big, feat for her, it was hard to get to these places to have these specialist appointments. So, both of their healths kind of deteriorated. And thankfully, what was going on with mom, I was able to, like, I was old enough, I could drive, I had a car, I could take her to Seattle, and I wasn't scared to drive on the road. Sorry, mom, I'm, calling you out on that one. You were afraid to ride on the highway. But the access to that stuff, and yeah, an hour away is not that bad. A lot of people travel that, but it's always a financial piece, and I then you're sitting in your, like, let's see, so my mom would have been, and also my parents had me super late in life. My mom was almost 40 when she had, or no, my dad was almost 40. My mom was 33 when she had me. So by the time I was 20, she was in her mid 50s. My dad was almost 60. And so here I am, like a 20-year-old, and my parents are super, not old to, standards, but compared to my other friends in that age, like I had friends whose parents were at least 10 years younger than my parents. So it was always kind of odd to, talk with my friends and, compare things, because my parents were going through a lot of stuff that their parents have like 10 years before they even get to.
Right. It's interesting because so we're talking about all these transitions, and I don't know if you were a part of the church yet, when we used to do our small groups and Bible talk groups, and these things used to be based upon your seasonal life. So it was just kind of interesting because the groups were determined where you were seasonally within your life. So were you a career young or college person? Were you Were you young marrieds with no children? Were you young married, young families, or and older families together, because the older families would mentor the younger families, you know, the marrieds. And then you had your, you know, well, back then we didn't even have, very few bodies had singles for the older singles.
Oh yeah.
But and then you basically had, you know, retirement, widows, you know, all of that. And so you were empty nesters. Yes, that's a lovely term. I hated that term. But because I remember that was one of the changes, you know, I had to go through, because, you know, that I had this full house, right? And we, I'm sure T, you can speak to this, but, you know, there's something about, we're raising children, right? We're doing all of these things and our life is full and rich, we hope anyway. And we're doing our jobs, we're at the peaks of our careers, we're having, you know, children, they're getting right. And then all of a sudden, especially the moms, for some reason, but even fathers who are connected in, where you lose your way, because you're like, wait a minute, now what do I do? Now here's my transition, right? Now what am I doing? Where is my focus supposed to be? Because it's been about raising the next generation and getting them off and doing all of these things. And now you're like, who am I? Because you've lost yourself, right? Because you poured everything you had, most of us do as parents, pour everything you have into raising these children and being a good spouse and, you know, doing all of these things. And then you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing now. I don't know, you know, how do I move forward, and how do I rediscover myself and realize that I've been, you know, going to high school sporting events and even social events and, you know, proms and graduations and all these things. And now I have no focus anymore. I don't even know who I am and where I'm supposed to be. And it can have a negative effect and turn positive, or it can have a positive effect if you have the right mindset going into it. And I like what you said, T. I wanted to be positive about it. So maybe this year, you know, let's celebrate this, right? Rather than mourn it or grieve it, or, you know. And you and I, T, we're working on a project together about, you know, toxic positivity. We don't want to have that, but we do want to have a purposeful view, a purposeful take on what these next stages are. How do we transition into them? You know, so yeah.
Well, and I think, yeah, I think it having that intention, that ability to make the best of things and do that is great. One of the things I kind of wanted to go back to just real briefly is, as EJ, you were talking about your parents and how things were so far away access, and you even qualified it a bit like, yeah, I know it was only an hour, but here's the thing: when you're sick, that hour might as well be 5 or 6.
Right.
And the amount of energy it takes to do anything, it's kind of like the spoon theory. That might be something we can talk about at some point. So, you know, there's only so many spoons available to each of us each day. And so how we use them is important.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Yes. So, okay. So outside of age and cognitive, we also have emotional and physical transitions that happen. I don't know. Currently, I feel like I'm going through a lot of that right now, based upon some choices that I've made and decisions I've made within my life. I'm kind of tackling, if you will, a lot of emotional and physical transformation. I chose bariatric surgery because my body was definitely not cooperating with me. And definitely emotional. I've shared, in this podcast before, I didn't, just like many others out there, I didn't have an easy upbringing. It was filled with a lot of trauma, and it was filled with a lot of abuse and neglect, if you will. It wasn't an easy thing. And those emotional, traumatic things that happened to me, it would be interesting, T, I think, I can't remember if you and I talked about this before, but trauma has to slow down or halt different developmental stages that we would normally have. And so I was thinking that definitely certain things, and all I can do is speak from my own experience because I'm not a professional. But I know that certain things were definitely halted or slowed down or stopped. And I've seen that in my own children because of some of the, especially my younger son, I think because of some of the very specific trauma he went through, it stopped his ability to develop at the same rate as some of the people his own age and where he was at. Right. That happens. I don't know. Where did T go?
She's having some technical difficulties. We're trying to text back and forth about what's going on. So
okay, good. Well, anyway, I just think that we'll keep talking about it, but I'm hoping that T will be able to address that. It's got to halt some of that stuff.
Oh yeah, totally. And I've even seen it in the medical field, like just in general, like, you have somebody who goes through a traumatic experience at a young age, and that halts not so much their full development, but definitely like certain mental and cognitive developments, which definitely goes along with what we've been talking about with age and, how, as Tia explained earlier, even just your brain isn't really fully functional until your mid-20s. So you don't quite have the tools at a young age to deal with that because you either haven't been taught it or your body your brain is just not ready to handle it yet.
Yeah. I know in counseling, they talk a lot about our toolbox, and so I would say that some of us, and I know I had to develop some of those tools later on in response to all that trauma. I couldn't develop them maybe when I normally would have, based upon the normal ecclesiastical cycles of our life, right? And so, I've had to develop some of those later on in life. And that's why we talk so much, and we always share in the beginning that it's so important to have your counselors and doctors and psychologists and all of that, because they can help you develop those tools that we all need to face these issues, to get through these things, to successfully transition into the next thing. It's really, really important to have, those like Tina in our life, because without them, some of us might not ever develop those appropriate tools. And I love it. We get a thumbs up. So
yeah, he just texted that we're on the right track. So.
Okay, yes. So
apologies for the technical difficulties here.
Yes, thanks everybody for going through this with us. But yeah, so I just think that's why we stress how important that is.
Right.
Because without that, I know I wouldn't have developed into the person that I am. And I wouldn't even be able to make some of the choices that I made this year, the bariatric surgery, I have my own house. I'm living alone. I hired my first male caregiver. the other day. My son,
Yeah, I had to check and make sure I was on the right phone call when I heard that, because I was like, is that Lori speaking? What did she
right?
just say?
But you know, and he's so sweet and gentle and kind, and he's a perfect gentleman. Anyway, it's been amazing. But because of my domestic abuse, because of my past, hiring a guy would have never, like,
Right.
that just wouldn't happen. And not only, I mean, because I have to trust him. We're here, we're often alone, you know? So I was saying to my counselor the other day, I think that some of my new confidence that I feel like I have is coming from, because of all of the counseling and the time that I've put into building these emotional tools. I feel much better in my ability to read people, to have discernment, and to just know and acknowledge when I'm in maybe a not safe place or a negative environment, or when there's all these unhealthy people. I feel like because of all the work that I've done over this last few years, I have a level of confidence when I'm sitting. I was in that interview and I felt like, no, I think I understand where this person, this guy is coming from and what he could offer me and do for me. And I prayed about it and I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to hire him because I think he fits everything else that I need. And it doesn't matter that he's a guy. I don't have to worry about that. Whereas previously with all of my, emotional walls and, just a real inability to, I mean, I remember being traumatized in our church because we're very, well, before the pandemic, we're a very huggy, touchy feely church body, right? And I used to just panic when brothers wanted to walk up and, hug me, or, I mean, even do the polite little side hug. I was like, I was just frozen sometimes. I could barely move. And now I've opened up my home and invited a man in to help with my care, my physical care. So just huge leaps and bounds. Yeah.
Yeah. And I am super proud of you for that. And I want to say that, you alluded to something. You said you felt like you were having a problem back then reading people. Mm-hmm. Because when you thought you found somebody, he turned out to be a monster. So you had that instinct taken away from you.
I did.
In a very bad way. Yeah. And it's taken you a long time to grow and learn that, you weren't. He was just hiding and it was on him.
Yeah.
He hid that from you on purpose.
Well, yeah.
And so you had that choice taken away from you. And now you've grown to realize, no, I have good instincts on people. I know these guys. If I'm meeting this man, I'm going to hire him because I feel like he's going to be an asset to my care team.
Yeah.
And that's a huge milestone for you. Like, that's big.
It is. It was really huge because it was very empowering. And, like I said, I feel a level of confidence that I didn't have. And thanks for that reminder, because I did for a long time. I questioned every decision, everything that I did.
And rightfully so.
Yeah.
You had just gotten out of a nasty domestic violence situation with 2 children who were traumatized from it.
Yep.
Yourself included.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you had every right to be skittish of anybody, male or female.
I know.
Primarily male.
Yeah.
But all of you have grown from it.
Yeah. Well, and then, so that's interesting you say that, because so here I am starting to identify all these things and grow and put these emotional tools in. And, we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. We talked about looking our age. And, we live in a society where we want to look polished. We want to look perfect. We want We don't like to show weakness. There's all these things. We don't want to be too overly emotional because then that's being too vulnerable and, and that can get us hurt. And so I was thinking, I didn't even realize. So one of the things I identified was that my weight, the weight that I had put on since my youth, had become this very huge, literally and physically, emotional security blanket. The weight protected me from the world. And so one of the things that I was finally able to identify in my counseling and other stuff was that I actually, in a different way, was completely traumatized, if you will, by a lot of the women in my life. Because when I was younger, and you and I have talked about this before, Aaron, I had an amazing body. I was an athlete. I kind of had that Marilyn Monroe. I had, it was very shapely and the women in my life, especially then, were jealous, mean. And so as I put on the weight, right, the men stopped being attracted, right?
Yeah.
But then guess what?
The
women wanted to be my friends.
Yeah, because they weren't intimidated and weren't there was no
there was no competition.
There you go. Yeah.
There was no need to be jealous of me anymore because the men didn't care about me anymore that way. Or, I'm not saying that because I know there are some people that, anyway, that's a whole nother discussion.
Right.
But for me, in my mind, that weight made that possible. And so just the idea of losing weight, and I said this to T and another good friend of mine who's a counselor and my own counselor, I was at a point that I would rather walk through a vat of acid than to lose the weight. Because to lose the weight meant that I was going back to that very vulnerable week where I wasn't strong and I couldn't make these decisions. And now I would be overwhelmed with all of these other things. Of course, it's not how it's been, which is amazing. But I think that the reason it hasn't been that way is because I chose to do this whole process with counselors, with lots of therapy, with lots of help, learning mindfulness, and also enriching my own personal faith. I got to share on T's podcast, that I really feel now that I have a relationship with my Heavenly Father. Whereas before, I think I was just the good soldier. I would, and I say that all the time, I'm a good soldier. Give me a task and I'll do it. Give me some rules, and except for my little inner rebellious side, which I think we all have, I'll do whatever you legally, I'll follow the laws. I'll do my best to stay in line. I don't like to rock the boat too much,
But Tina says some of what you're saying is what Lori is speaking to is our ability to be flexible, which can help transitions be positive. Yes. Transition can mean growth. And she said her opinion, Lori, is now that you're taking down the wall to protect you from the world, who's going to protect the world from you? Just saying.
Woo, I am Lori, hear me roar. I like
but
that.
It's so true though, because you're finally taking yourself back.
Yes. I'm really I'm discovering, it's funny, I had these little visions of it, right? I remember after my first divorce, I literally didn't even realize who I was outside of that marriage, because I was married very young to somebody that I'd known since my early childhood. And I'd just gone from being at home with mom and dad to being married. And so I really didn't feel like I knew anything about myself. And I remember I'd gotten this new job working at a bank, and we were in all this training. and we were learning about how to read our customers so we could serve them better. But it really helped me to inner reflect, right? And I remember the first time I went to a grocery store and I was pulling out a bag of peas or something, and I was like, wait a minute, I don't even like peas. And I put the peas back, right? And it was this just huge, I know it sounds so simple, but for me, it was this huge thing of, I don't need to watch that movie anymore or eat that food because I realized I didn't like any of that. And then unfortunately, I met the monster in between there, right? So it kind of stunted all that. But I feel like I've come back to that point in my life where I'm discovering what I like, the music I like to listen to, the activities that I like to do. And it is a fine balance. One that I'm not always comfortable with. And so we should probably at some point dig into this a little more, but I do struggle sometimes with all of this self-discovery and self-learning. I feel like it can be a deterrent to what we have as traditional roles within our faith. As a faithful person, somebody who follows Jesus, right? We are asked to live sacrificially and selflessly. And I'm struggling with how exactly do I do that? How do I know? So this is where I definitely am still learning and growing. How do I know when to sacrifice something, when to put my selfish desires aside, or when am I being selfish and when am I engaging in self-care? I think this is something I'm really struggling with, and I don't have that balance yet. I will often sometimes have feelings of guilt or doubt because I'm like, am I leading people astray when I'm saying, go learn how to focus on yourself, go learn what you like, and I'm learning that Jesus was very mindful. Jesus was very engaged in self-care. He often went off by himself. He often prayed alone, right? He ate the right things. He fasted. He did all these he took care of the temple. And so because I haven't taken care of the temple for so long and have all this emotional baggage, I'm really struggling with that balance now. And I'm just right now being very transparent and vulnerable, but I'm really struggling in that area. I haven't figured that balance out yet. And I'm seeking it,
Right.
But,
well, and I think seeking it is the important thing, is that you're willing to learn and you're willing to read it and study about it. And like you said, I think somebody told you or reminded you to look at Jesus, because Jesus did do self-care, but that wasn't a term 2,500 years ago when the Bible was written and all, Jesus, his life was starting to happen and stuff. So, we see this now, Jesus went off to pray by himself. He had his handful of friends that he trusted. He didn't have 1,000, people, he didn't share everything with everyone. But he did self-care. And
well, so Tina says that the Bible teaches us that God is looking to transform us. I do like that. Thank you. And to grow us. That tells me that we matter enough for self-care to give us strength to serve others. I like that. Thank you, Tina.
And that's, you think about it, it's like glass half full, glass half empty. It's like if we view ourselves as half empty, then, if we're emptying out our glass, how can we give to somebody else if we don't have anything in our glass?
Right. That's how we go to burnout.
Which is why boundaries are so important.
Right. And then
And
it's such a
the
discerning thing. How do you know which, when, and where to place those boundaries? And
I'm going to teach somebody a word. There's this really cool word in the English language. It's called no. It's 2 letters. No. You're allowed to say no. Just saying. Like, I understand. Okay, I understand. I understand as a Christian, we're asked to serve others, to help others. I fully support that. But if that service takes away from me going to a doctor's appointment because I need to make sure my temple is okay, that's when there's a boundary that's being crossed, because I have to take care of myself.
Yeah.
You have to take care of yourself as well, because God asked us to take care of the temple that he gave us.
Yeah. Yeah, he did.
And that's where we have to lay our boundaries down. And
it's finding that balance. I'm really glad you said that, though. Yeah. Enabling versus service. Yes. Yes, Tina.
Right. And I think
service. Yes.
And I like, yes, like, please, like, if you're in a part of a church body and you guys are going to go serve, do it if you can. But when a church invites, it's like, hey, everybody, this is what our service project is. If you can't go, it's okay. And I was once shared and advised, because tithing can be an important piece of church life. Right. That's a part of service. But if I make, say, $500 a month and $50 is 10%, and that's what I should be tithing, which is kind of the standard.
Right.
If I can't financially give that $50, because that means my car doesn't get gas to go to work and things, then how am I going to supplement that? Well, I serve in so many different ways. I'm serving in the singles ministry. I'm serving at church. I'm serving on the worship team. I'm printing lyrics all the time for the worship team. I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I am serving in a way that I can do it if I financially can't tithe.
We put too much emphasis on the financial piece,
right,
when tithing isn't just, because tithing, actually, the definition of tithing has so much more in it. It's so much
right,
more complex, and it's about,
but it is right. But it is a great opportunity for tithing for people who have the financial ability, who may not be able to serve. Like, right, there's people in the church who, unfortunately, they have a very time crunching job that takes most of their time, and they are not able to come out on the weekends and do things because they're working, etc. And you know what? Tithe, because that's something you can do. And if tithing financially is not something, and that's, our church, it's like we say, if you're a visitor, don't feel obligated to give. We're not saying like every person that walks in that door has to say you have to give X amount of dollars a month or X amount, because that for some is a deterrent, for going to church, because I don't want to have to, give them money. So, no. And not me saying that, but like, that's a lot of the mentality people have.
I think when you have a healthy body, church or otherwise, right, in our own lives, and right, when we are, then all of that is working together, right, create a healthy balance. Exactly. Right.
And that's why it talks about in the Bible as well, as that we're all this big, like, we are a body.
Right.
You can't have a body full of eyes. You can't have a body full of arms. You can't have a body full of feet, because it's not a body. It's just feet.
Right. You got to have them all working together. But if we have a
balance of 2 eyes, 2 hands, 2 feet, and we all work together, some can do something and others can do something else, and we all come together and we make a church body, and we make a serving body.
Yeah.
So I think the pressure that you're feeling of like doing X, Y, and Z, or others, maybe that's in similar situations, like, find boundaries, find ways of giving in the ways that you financially and physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually can give.
It's interesting, because I know you've heard me talk with some of the, I co-facilitate this chronic illness group, and I've had a couple of them throughout the years. And, one of the things, since we're talking about transformations and positive and negative ways to do this, it's hard when you have chronic illness, because you have to grieve the loss of some of the physical things, emotional things that you can't do anymore. And there are, whether we like it or not, I often will say, my body's hijacked me today and it's in control, and sorry, I can't follow through on that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's very hard as a follower of Christ is figuring out when I can or need to say no, because my body, my spoons, aren't allowing that, right? But we feel guilty. We feel, because we've missed, the last 3 Sunday services, and we've only made it to 1 midweek, and there's a desire and a heartful intent to want to do some of these things, but when you're chronically ill, a lot of times you can't participate, right, or you can't participate even fully. So it is about learning that balance of when do I say yes, when do I say no, and how do I let those things go,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's a fear too, you want your yes to be your yes and your no to be your no. And, you don't want to commit to something. So and I know there's a lot of people that can't commit to things, and that's understandable. And even I say, I will do my best to be there, but I'm not making any promises, because that's,
I say, God willing, and the creeks don't rise.
Right. So, and I'm not saying like, don't go to church at all, or, but if you're physically, like, you broke your leg yesterday, you don't have to go to church. And I think when my dad passed away, he passed away on a Saturday night, and I said something about, I got to go to church. And I think it was you who said, Erin, I think you're allowed to miss a day of church. But I wanted to go, and like, I wanted my aunt to go, because she was visiting, but I'm like, yeah, I have no desire to go. And, like, I love being there, but like that was like, I could not have mentally been there that day.
No.
And everybody understood why I wasn't there, and, and it worked out, but I felt guilty for not being there. But I had to remind myself that in this moment, like, God understands. And I still took communion, and I still prayed, and I still had my quiet time. Yeah. So, and I think, wow, we've talked about a lot today. I think, we talked about transitioning in ages, because we talk about, we did talk about a little more on the cognitive side, but there are those times when you are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, dementia, early onset Alzheimer's. And
I mean, what I have, hepatic encephalopathy.
Yep, and it can cause, cognitive issues where, I learned about Alzheimer's when I was in 4th grade. My 4th grade teacher explained it to us because her mom was struggling with Alzheimer's. And she's like, my mom could literally look at a pen on the table and say, what's that? And not remember what it was. Or, she could have lived in this house for 50 years and still forget how to go to the bathroom, or like where the bathroom is. And that's stuff, like, sometimes you come out of that enough to like, oh, I couldn't find the bathroom. But then like an hour later, like, you're like, where's the bathroom? And then it's like later you think, oh man, I really forgot where the bathroom was. Like, and then you start putting that pressure on yourself. It's like, oh my God, like, what's wrong with me? Why is this a thing? And then you learn, like, get this diagnosis, and it starts happening, and you're like, great. And so, and I'm finding, I have a family member who's starting to struggle with some of this, cognitive deficits as she hits, I think she's in her late 70s, she has to be in her late 80s now. Sorry, I don't remember my aunt's age. But yeah, so it can definitely be a huge transition and a huge learning curve for you and the people around you, just like with any chronic illness. And it takes grieving time. Yeah. And, and we talked a lot about ages and how our, the ages can affect how our brain does translate all of that emotion and physical and stuff. And, we didn't really touch on, and I'm sure we'll go back to this at some point in the future about, how, and we have talked about it in other podcasts about how trauma can affect how we associate things.
Yes.
I PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders, it's from, is the whole gamut of, something major happens to you that causes stress, and it's, it continues afterwards. That
it's interesting because we we look at these things, and I was just thinking, because it's the way my brain works, and I'm trying, okay, so what can I do to combat those things? What can I do to help those transitions, and I was thinking in my mind, there's this concept of resiliency, which is one's ability to bounce back, if you will. That's a very simplistic way of talking about resiliency, but it is our ability to, yes, it is our ability to recover, to respond and bounce back to all of these different transitions that we're going through. So how do we, and one of the things that I've been learning a lot about in this last couple of years, which is I think what's helping me, and T, if I know you're listening, correct me if I'm wrong, but I honestly believe that building up my resiliency is what is allowing me to be this healthier, more discerning person that I'm becoming, transitioning into, right? And so I'm trying to identify purposeful things versus toxic, just automatic go to what's the positive, what's the silver lining, because that's kind of for me, I didn't realize, but going to that silver lining was always, it's kind of my way of running away from it. This is a big revelation for me, but finding that silver lining for me became this toxic, if you will, positivity within my life, where I didn't get to truly learn and grow from the situation. I just put a positive spin on it so that I could move on, so that I could sustain some kind of life-giving force through whatever it was and the darkness that was surrounding me. Wow, these are big revelations here. So what I've been learning in the last 2 years is that definitely, Tina says, resiliency will definitely allow transitions to be smooth and can make it positive. Yes. So good resiliency is how we get that good positivity versus the toxic positivity. And that's what I've been learning is so the mindfulness, the self-care, these other, and all of these tools are applicable in so many, all the things. I listened back to a couple of our episodes, and there are things that just come up every single time. And it's mindfulness, and it's self-care, and it's, sleeping hygienes and eating properly, and all these things, they all have to do with resiliency. They all have to do with how does our body come back from? How does our mind come back from? How does it respond and in an appropriate, healthy manner versus that toxicity that most of us tend to go to right off? It's the crutch. Toxicity is the crutch.
Right.
So,
and again, surrounding yourself with people in the same stage as you, same walk of life as you.
Yes.
People who've already been through it, so you can get guidance through that. Seeking out counseling, seeking out therapy.
Yes.
Having those people that you can go to, and that may even just be, a trusted worship leader at church, or an elder in the church. People who can help guide you through it, or there's all sorts of programs, and a lot of there can be group therapy sessions for people who are struggling with it. Well, let's get you into a therapy session with a group of people that can do this, are going through the same thing. So there's all those different ways you can combat it. Self-care is definitely an important thing too. Whether it's journaling and just writing down your feelings, whether it's getting an extra massage a month or something to help you kind of just process through the pain maybe of your body changing. But yeah, so I'm sure, given I know we'll have updates and things to talk about in the future, so we'll definitely tackle this again.
Yeah, I want to close with this. Tina talked about what we're doing in this time is we're redefining success. And I really like that.
Man,
We thank you,
right.
T, for that. That is a huge part of resiliency. We are redefining what success looks like and feels
Right.
like and is. And when success is healthy, then it's just this beautiful thing. And it does actually attract other like-minded people, and you find yourself just being in different situations, and now all of a sudden you're kind of like me. I hired my first male caregiver. I'm happily and successfully living alone. I don't run around my house scared of the boogeyman right now. I mean, please, if that's your issue, I'm not judging you. I'm just saying, right now I don't have to worry about that because I'm not so afraid anymore. I'm not so triggered and whatever, because I've been able to redefine and be resilient and learn resiliency. So yeah, I definitely want to come back to some of this again. This is huge. I really feel like even in this process of this podcast, which we kind of joked about before, I feel like, wow, that was just very eye-opening even for me. So yeah.
Yep. Well, just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or medical professionals. This episode will be available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and more. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Behind the Mask PC. And if you don't use social media, you can email us at behindthemaskpc@gmail.com. Feel free to review us on Anchor, leave feedback on the platform you listen to us on, because we'd love to hear what you think. If there's a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, let us know and we'll see about making it happen. You can find me, EJ, on Twitter and Instagram as EJ8302. T's other podcast that we talked about earlier is called Our Journey with Jesus Podcast, and you can find that on Facebook. And you can find Lori on Twitter as Carpe Sparrow, CARPESPERO, Lori LORIL. On Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook, you can find her as Carpe Sparrow Lori Lee, LEIGH. And on behalf of the ladies and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.